I know what the problem is. Good to see you, man. Last time I saw you, we took a photo with Dr. Bullock at the
That's right.
That's right. It was like 25 years later.
I know, man. All righty.
No, you know what? Let me get that before.
You gotta say, yeah, you gotta have the greetings.
Yeah, I'm gonna, the dean's gonna do some greetings.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Well, I'll just say this. I will forever be the youngest person in this crowd.
I know.
Forever.
I know. Look, I embrace my age. It's not doing me any good because people, I think I'm doing more at 35. Then, I let the Graham account folks talk me into coming out of retirement. And
I will. I'll email you, man.
I'm gonna get started.
Oh, man, we definitely need to talk. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, oh, my man. I will.
Man, okay. Good morning, everybody. Oh, come on, wake up, y'all. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Good morning.
Man, wearing two masks is hard. Okay, try to put extra protection. So I'd like to welcome everybody to day 3 of the 8th UMD Environmental Justice Environmental Health Disparities Symposium. Of course, my name is Dr. Shelby Wilson. I'm your MC for the day. It's been really exciting. The first 2 days, or day 1 and day 2, we're really focused on more national kind of focus. Of course, our theme is energy versus power, visions for the future. So for those of you who attended day 1, day 2, you heard Dr. Jalon White-Newsom talking about, in her opening speech for the day 1, energy. What did she say, y'all? She said evolution of the movement, right? You got to be nimble. We have so many issues that we have to be nimble, okay? She also said, we have to what else she said, y'all? Environmental justice has to be the focus of what we do, right? Responsibility, intergenerational, right? And you need youth, right? We have to have youth in the movement. We also had a presentation from Dr. Sharonda Buchanan, who is the new head of the Office of Environmental Justice for Health and Human Services. And, EJ is about health. Folks are complaining about these issues because of the health impacts, right? We had a great closing plenary session that day. Corporate action, corporate responsibility for climate change, environmental justice. And of course, day 2, we had a great opening session with some icons of the EJ movement. Peggy Shepard, Dr. Robert Bullard, Dr. Beverly Wright, funding the EJ movement. So it sounds like the movement, as I said, I guess it will be both televised and hopefully a little bit more funded now. And, you know what I'm saying? And so we also had great sessions on EJ legislation across the days, NEPA, Title VI, a lot of sessions on Justice 40, President Biden's Executive Order 14008, right? As we move from dirty energy economy to clean energy economy, 40% of those benefits should go to disadvantaged communities, right? And then the closing session, we talked about just energy transitions. So today we have some of those same themes, and we're gonna have a great opening panel. But I wanna, pass the mic to Dean Boris Lesniak, the Dean of the School of Public Health. He's going to provide greetings for all of our panelists and our attendees and welcome you again to this 8th UMD Environmental Justice and Health Disparities Symposium with the theme Energy versus Power, Visions for the Future. Please, Dean.
Great, thank you so much, Jacoby, and thank you all for being here this morning. What a beautiful day to gather like this. And the important aspect of this is the gathering part. I know this is day 3. I know we've used technology like we've had gotten used to in the last 2.5 years to be able to communicate with each other. But there's nothing like looking at each other's eyes directly. There's nothing like looking at 3 dimensions of people. There's nothing like having sidebar conversations over coffee. And so on behalf of the University of Maryland, and specifically the School of Public Health here at College Park, I welcome you to 3 dimensions. I welcome you to handshakes or fist bumps, however you feel comfortable. I welcome you to safety. Wear a mask. We've been tested. We got green things, right? Feel as comfortable as you want here with us today. It's incredible to also see the momentum generated by the EJ movement, and particularly as a dean here for 5 years, and this week told that they want me to stay for another 5. How cool is that for me? To have a person, to have a professional, to have a passionate advocate, such as Associate Professor Dr. Jacoby Wilson.
Full now.
Yeah.
That's right.
Sometimes a handful of trouble, I'll be honest, but that's what people like Jacoby are about, aren't they? Right? They don't take things sitting down. And the ability of him and his team to convene so many experts and advocates, community members, and elected officials in one place to discuss EJ, to discuss the movement and its importance. I also want to congratulate him on the Robert Buller EJ Award, recognition that he'll receive later today from the Sierra Club. So it's been almost 10 years ago. I know there's been some gaps thrown in. December 2012 was the first EJ Symposium held here at the University of Maryland, which led to the establishment of an environmental justice coalition in the Maryland and Washington, D.C. area. We come back pretty much every single year to not only remember the beginning, but to remember where we're at now at this point in time, but also to contemplate the future. I know there's been incredible sessions over the last few days, but once again, we are now gathered at this point in time to be able to share things. And it's critical that this movement is at a key portion and in fact aligns well where the university is as an academic institution. Right? We contribute to research, providing scientific evidence, but we're also dedicated to taking on what Dr. Pines, the president of our university, calls the grand challenges. And the grand challenges include environmental injustices, racism, climate change. We as a university want to build a partnership that will bring change, and bring solutions. As the leader of the School of Public Health, I want to express gratitude to all of you who work tirelessly in support of environmental justice, sustainability, climate resilience, and healthy communities. I want to recognize some of the legends that are present here today. Those who were involved with the Warren County PCB landfill fight in North Carolina that helped foment the environmental justice movement 40 years ago. And we'll hear from them today. This includes Benjamin Chavez, civil rights leader, got involved in EJ. Dolly Burwell, community resident of Warren County, who was called or is called the mother of the environmental justice movement. She's in our house. Charles Lee from the EPA is also on the panel that'll be moderated by Vernice Miller Travis. We are amongst all-stars here. Passionate people who have a fight, who've been fighting. Please also visit the student poster sessions and some of the topics of our EJ Summer Scholar students that they've been working on as the first cohort of the Meta-funded program for these students. We also thank all our sponsors that made this event possible, but a special thank you goes out to whom? Goes out to the staff that made this event possible. There are a lot of unknowns coming into all this, right? Unknowns about technology. Is this going to work? How is it going to fly? Well, we're almost there. And without this staff, which included Pamela Bingham, Shawnice King, Noble Smith, Ariel Wharton, and Anushi Garg. Please stand up, staff, if you're here present with us right now. You're probably out there. Thank you so much for what you have brought to this symposium. So once again, on behalf of the School of Public Health, on behalf of University of Maryland, we're glad to have you here. Dr. Wilson, take it away.
Thank you, sir. Let's thank the dean. We're gonna have Hype Man 1 and Hype Man 2 for the morning. Let's go. So I'm gonna stop talking real quick. I'm gonna introduce our moderator for this session. We'll run a little bit behind time, so Vernice, I'll let you know when we want to start wrapping it up, and we're gonna have to probably go into the break a little bit. So those would transition to the first concurrent block, and maybe go into lunch a little bit. But we'll get back on time. But we're gonna take our time right now and really savor the moment, as the dean said, of this 40th anniversary celebration, remembrance of the fight, the beginning, the spark of the EJ movement. And I'm going to pass the mic to my dear friend, colleague, mentor, neighbor. She lives in, where you live, Vernice? Bowie. She lives in Bowie. I live in Bowie too. Neighbor, Vernice Miller Travis, one of the icons of the EJ movement, you know, co-founder of We Act for Environmental Justice, now a vice president with the Metropolitan Group. That's correct? Executive vice president with the Metropolitan Group. Vernice has had, a long career as environmental justice advocate, working in one of our groundbreaking studies, United Church of Christ, toxic waste and race study, and some of those folks who helped to get that study, that's one of those first studies that said race is the most important predictor of the distribution of environmental hazards, are on this stage as well. And so she's going to moderate this session for us. She was there working with a lot of these, our icons are on the stage. So Vernice, please take it from here.
Thank you, Jacoby.
You're welcome.
I'm good. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
So this is just an unbelievable moment to bring together some folks who haven't been together in a really long time. And so first I want to say about Dr. Wilson and to the dean, the University of Maryland has been here for a really long time. And it's been in the midst of this historic African-American majority county, Prince George's County. But I don't know that this university has ever had a connection to this county and to the people who are in struggle in the Mid-Atlantic region and in the state of Maryland as it has since Dr. Wilson showed up. And believe me, he has gotten you a lot of leverage because he gets a lot of us to do stuff for free that we charge other people a whole lot of money for. And when he says come, we show up. And so I just want to say to you, Dr. Wilson, that we didn't know we were waiting on you, but we really were waiting on you. And we're thankful that you're here. So now let me open up this panel and introduce some amazing, amazing people. So first, to my far left is Miss Dolly Burwell. Dolly Burwell is one of the community leaders who first stepped forward to lead this fight in Warren County, North Carolina, to prevent the siting of a polychlorinated biphenyl contaminated soil landfill in the community of Afton, a poor majority African-American community and a county that is majority African-American, Warren County. But when she stepped forward to do that, nobody had put race and environment together. Nobody had lifted up the struggle that local communities were having when their states and federal governments were making decisions to burden some communities and leave other communities alone. And they stepped forward and did a whole lot of organizing. We're going to hear a lot more from Dolly about that today, but I just want to lift up the Miss Dolly Burwell. Next to Dolly is my former boss, the Reverend Dr. Benjamin Chavis. And when I met Ben, he had come to Union Theological Seminary in New York to finish his PhD in divinity. And a friend of mine I went to college with had gone to school in North Carolina and said, you know, Ben is in New York now, right? And I said, no, he's not. She said, girl, he's somewhere in the neighborhood. And I went scouring the streets between my apartment and campus. I went to Barnard College, which was across the street from where he went to finish his PhD. And I looked and I looked and I looked, and one cold day in January, I ran into Ben on a corner. We lived on the same street a block away. And we stood out there talking and talking and talking. I had him come to campus and talk to the students, and we remained friends. And I would call him every 6 months and say, you know, Ben, you need to hire me because I'm the greatest thing in the future of the civil rights movement. You know, there's no hubris like a 21-year-old or a 22-year-old, right? And I called him for years with that same story. And one day he said, well, I think you need to come in and maybe meet our research director, Charles Lee. We're getting ready to do this special project on toxic injustice. And I don't know if you two will hit it off, but maybe you and Charles might be able to do some work together. And I came in and I met Charles Lee. Now, this is the Civil Rights Division of the United Church of Christ, a very small Protestant denomination, the remnants of the church established by the Pilgrims when they arrived here in these United States. It's a tiny little church, but within that church is a powerful Black presence. So when I go to meet Charles, I'm assuming I'm going to meet a Black guy. And I walk in and there's Charles Lee. And I was like, okay, this is different, right? And then Charles lays out for me the vision for this study, the special project on toxic injustice that would become toxic waste and race in the United States. So I want to say something for the record, and it's slightly controversial. I don't think it's controversial because I was there and I know what I'm saying is true. There are a lot of people who claim to be the founders and the architects of this work, and there are a lot of us, right? That's the beauty of this movement. A lot of people have made it possible for us to be here and continue to do this work. But when I tell you that it came out of Charles's head, believe me, when I tell you that Charles is the person who said we need to marry activism and research, that we need to drive this conversation across the country, that we need to gather up all these people at the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit, that we need principles to guide our work, the 17 principles of environmental justice. When I tell you that he is the one, believe me, how do I know? Because I was his research assistant. I was right there at his side. So now, Charles is not like Ben and Vernice and Dolly, right? We will tell you all day and all night what happened, who was there, etc. Charles won't say a word. Charles will put his head down and Charles will get the work done. So the reports, the advocacy, the training, the movement building, the work to build that institutional piece at the United States Environmental Protection Agency, that's him right there, Charles Lee. Trust me, that's him. So now, we are going to have some conversation with these icons. And lastly, I want to say that I have had the great benefit of having an incredible career in this field. This is my life's work, but I wouldn't have this work if it wasn't for Dolly and Ben and Charles. So in front of all of y'all, I want to say to them that I wouldn't be here and I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for you, especially you, Charles Lee. So let's start with some questions. So we are here to commemorate the 40th anniversary of an extraordinary social movement, civil rights battle, fight for the lives and the well-being of a historic community, Warren County, North Carolina. You might have seen this wonderful piece that the Washington Post published last spring, front page of the Washington Post, thank you, 2 full pages inside the Washington Post, written by Darrell Fears about the history and the origins of this movement. And here we have the people who did that. So I want to start with Dolly and say, Dolly, if you could tell us, what were you all up against? What were you facing? What made you decide that you wanted to lay your bodies down in the road? Tell us, Dolly, how did we get started?
Thank you, Bernice. And let me first say thank you to CEJH and to the University of Maryland and to the dean and everyone who
Pull that
had.
mic closer, Dolly.
I don't think you speak right.
Yeah. First, let me just say thank you to CEJH and to the dean and the University of Maryland and to everyone who played a part in putting together, especially this plenary. I am just so excited to be here this morning to share a few thoughts with you, but to just be in the company of my comrades in the struggle, Dr. Chavez and Charles Lee. I understand what you're saying, because while Charles was doing that research, he stayed at my house, and I know he was talking to you, and it was just we was just so happy to. So I ditto everything you were saying about Charles. You know, as I've been thinking about, as we've been leading up to the 40th anniversary of the environmental justice struggle in Warren County and the PCB movement, fight against the PCB dumping in Warren County, I have found myself literally in a state of what I call remembering to remember. Remembering to remember. It's not been easy to recall some of the pain, but what I remember most was not the technical stuff, but the emotions of the fellow citizens and brothers and sisters in Warren County. They ran the gamut, from anger to sheer sadness. I recall what I was doing that day when in 1978, when I learned that Ward Transformers had dumped PCBs along the roadsides and more than 30 gallons of PCB-laced oil along 210 miles of roadsides in Warren County. I remember how sad I felt, how powerless I felt, but that didn't last long, because I remember Timothy, 2 Timothy, verse 1-7, that says, God does not give you the fear. God does not give you a spirit of fear, but of the power and love and sound mind. So I said to myself, you know, and I remember what my parents said to me: when life gives you lemon, make lemonade. And I said to myself, you know, God, you has brought me this far. And I knew that God had afforded me some opportunities, Bernice, that you have gathered over the years. I was a member of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. I was a member of the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice. I was a member of the Oak Level United Church of Christ, where the Leon White was my pastor. And I said to myself, I went from feeling powerless to feeling powerful. I drew on the spirit of the ancestors that said to me, fight. And so I used all the tools that I had in my tool book. I went to work organizing. I called my community. We got together. We went to jail. We was mad as hell, and we were not going to take it anymore.
Here, here.
So when the truck started rolling, we started laying our bodies down in the streets, going to jail. More than 500 people was arrested. I also remember the spirit of Miss Thelma Davis and Miss Irene Robinson, those women who could not march, but they went in the kitchen and they cooked and they fed us. I remember the spirit of Reverend Luther Brown, who insisted that every morning before we march, we would have a rally at the church and the elders would pray for our safety. Not a one of us, even though we one morning we walked right out in front of the church and laid our bodies down right in front of a truck. Nobody hit us. So although we knew that what the state of North Carolina was doing was so wrong. And you know, like I said, sometimes I had tears in my eyes, but I could clearly see why Warren County was chosen. Number one, we were predominantly Black. We have always been predominantly Black. There were once 14,000 enslaved Black people, 600 free Blacks, and only 4,000 whites. So we had always been a predominantly Black county. But again, the state, even though we were sad that the state would dump on us and that an EPA, an organization, an agency that was charged to protect us, waived all the requirements that they had to allow that PCB to be placed in Warren County. But I tell you, they underestimated the spirit of our ancestors that still lived within us, because it was a David and Goliath situation, and we fought, and we were determined to fight. And over the years, even though we lost the battle, I believe we won the war.
Hear, 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 hear.
Because 20 years later, when everything that we predicted would happen, that water would gather in the landfill, and the state says, well, we're going to pump this water out and take it to somewhere else. In 1982, people were saying, take this PCB to Alabama. But after the People of Color Summit and our community learned what environmental justice really was, the community said, hell no, we won't go. You cannot take this PCB out of contaminated water out of Warren County and put it in any other Black community. That's why we're going to Sampson County. And so we forced the state to live up to its promise to detoxify the landfill. And I'll just stop here because I could talk all morning, but I know we're short for time. But let me just say this. Let us always remember that even though you're poor, and even though you don't think you can do, you can. So let us continue to fight. We're going to still have to make some lemonade. We're still making lemonade. I'm so proud that every university in North Carolina is celebrating the 40th anniversary. In 1982, they hardly knew us, but they are celebrating their exhibit at UNC Chapel Hill, with my late daughter, Kimberly, being the focus of that exhibit, who was only a child during that time. The one regret that I have, as I spoke to Dr. Chavis this morning, that we had many children to go to jail, but none of those arrests were documented. But the University of North Carolina now is trying to go back and interview some of those young people and get their feeling on the record of what they remember from those days. So thank you again for having me here this morning. And I am just delighted to be in the company of my comrades.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Dolly. The true icon, Miss Dolly Burwell. So Ben, I want you to share with us what you were thinking, what made you, of all the civil rights struggles that were going on in the country at the time, and there were a lot. I believe Ronald Reagan was president. There was a whole bunch everywhere you look, globally and domestically. But you decided that it was important to invest in what was happening in Warren County. Why was that, Ben?
Thank you very much. First, I want to thank you to the Dean, to Professor Wilson, and to you, Bernice, for putting this program together. I just want to reiterate something that Dolly Burwell said. We are comrades. Please do not take that term lightly. We struggle, we go to jail together, we fight for freedom, justice, and equality, not just for ourselves. This is not about doing something for selfish ego gratification. This is about struggling for the masses of the people. This is about struggling not only for African Americans. And Bernice, when you say you first met Charles, you're expecting to meet a black guy. You did meet a black guy. Charles is the most black Asian American that I know. Because blackness is just not a skin color, it is a consciousness. It is a perspective of how you see the world, how you see life. And one of the things we find as comrades in the struggle, we also articulate and affirm that we are brothers and sisters. One of the perplexing problems today, Bernice, and I'm going to answer your question, but I want to set it in
Sure you are.
today's context. America is going through a struggle, not just around identity, but there are forces that are trying to separate people. They're trying to divide people. They're trying to pit people against one another based on race, based on ethnicity, based on even culture. This thing about critical race theory. Now, I'm sure toxic waste and race is going to be banned in Florida. It's going to be banned in Texas because it identifies how racism is not just the original sin in America, but it is something that keeps humanity divided. So, to answer your question, when we heard the outcry, let me see who's the we. I'm an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. And my whole life, I'm 74 years old, so I'm the elder up here. In 1982, or in the early 1980s, when the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice heard that the state of North Carolina was going to dump tons, hundreds of truckloads of polychlorinated biphenyls, PCB, in the black community in Warren County, we said something had to be done. Now, Dolly mentioned Reverend Leon White, the pastor of Oak Level United Church of Christ. We are members of the same church. So you got to understand that. We just didn't meet each other on some lonely highway. We went to church together. We prayed together. We called on the name of Jesus together. But one of the things about faith is something that you gotta not practice when you're just in church. Faith is something you have to stand on when you're outside of a church, when you're in the community. You know, Dr. King said it best. An injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And the injustice that was getting ready to happen in Warren County served as a threat to all counties, not just in North Carolina, but all over the world, and not just in the United States, but all over the world. Bernice, in truth, I had already spent most of the 1970s in prison in North Carolina. I was a member of the Wilmington 10. In 1972, 10 of us were sentenced to 282 years in prison because we dared to stand up for the rights of black school children in Wilmington, North Carolina, one of whom was in junior high school, who became a famous basketball player named Michael Jordan. So we went to jail, and quite frankly, when Dr. Charles Cobb got the call, he said, well, son, I don't know if I need to send you back down to North Carolina. But I said, we gotta go. And on September the 15th, when all those brothers and sisters start laying themselves, men, women, and children, I'm glad you mentioned the children, who literally laid in front of the trucks. The trucks were moving. It's one thing to lay in front of a truck when it's still. It's another thing to lay in front of a big dump truck, escorted by state police, and lay down in the road. You don't know whether the truck is going to stop or not. So it was the courage of Dolly Burwell, the courage of her children, the courage of other mothers and other grandmothers and their children, and some brothers, some men, but it was mainly women and children who first laid down on that road. Now, I got arrested the same day. My charge was not laying down in the path. My charge was driving too slow, because we were on the way to the jail to bail people out, and the state trooper pulled me over, and I said, "What's the problem?" The officer said, "Well, you're under arrest." I said, "For what?" He said, "You're driving too slow." So I spent the night also in Warren County Jail, and was in that situation that I first coined the term environmental racism. You know, even my colleagues in the civil rights movement at the time, this is in the early 1980s, people had not made an association between civil rights and environmental rights. The environmental movement was predominantly white movement, I would say almost all white, and the civil rights movement was interracial. And unfortunately, the leaders of these movements had really not had any dialogue. So when we came up with the term environmental racism, it was puzzling, challenging, even in the vernacular, even in the consciousness of people who first heard the term. That's 1982. And then, of course, in 1986 and 1987, when the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice gave us money, well, actually, Charles and I, we had to put together a proposal to get the money to fund the study, Toxic Waste and Race. And of course, while Reagan was president, you could make an allegation about racial discrimination. You had to statistically prove it. And then you had to show intent of racial discrimination. And that's what was so landmark about the study Toxic Waste and Race. It not only showed that of all of the contributing factors of where toxic facilities were located in America, race was the most determinative factor. And it's still the landmark study even to this day. Toxic waste and race. So we've come a long way, Bernice, but I would say that I do want to say something about this 40th anniversary. I think the greatest blessing, Charles and Dolly and Bernice and the audience, one of the greatest blessings is that we not only look back what happened 40 years ago, but we're looking now what is going on since then and what is going on today. And I'm very pleased to say that one of the blessings of the environmental justice movement that got its public initiative, got its public awareness out of Warren County, is that our movement today is just not an American movement. It is a global movement. It is a global movement for environmental justice. On the way here, I got a call from Brazil. They are also organizing an anniversary of Warren County in Sao Paulo and Rio and Bahia. It's in Portuguese, but they have even translated Charles Toxic Waste and Race into Portuguese. So our movement, our comradeship has evolved and spread all over the world in many different languages and many different cultures. No community should be deliberately and targeted to be exposed to environmental hazards. All communities should have free and safe water to drink without toxins, without pollutants. Every child of God, every man, woman, and child should be able to breathe air without pollutants. And now the intersection between climate change and environmental justice, because a lot of people now are talking about climate justice. I'm glad to hear that term, Bernice. Climate justice and environmental justice. Should not be any distinction between, because if we protect the earth, as our Native American brothers taught us at the first People of Color Summit, and I'm gonna stop now because I know I want to hear from Charles, but I just want to say that what started 40 years ago was certainly a pathway forward. And 40 years later, that pathway has become global. and we thank God. So I'm glad that the University of Maryland is institutionalizing this process. We need more research. We need more scholars. But most of all, we need more activists. We need more freedom fighters. We need more those who would challenge the forces. And I would say right now that in the midterm elections, environmental justice is on the ballot.
Indeed,
Climate justice is on the ballot.
indeed.
Pollution is on the ballot. And then what they're trying to do now, all this voter suppression that's going on in all these communities, they don't want us to vote. You know, they're trying to keep so-called progressive people from helping to set the agenda. But I'm optimistic. And I know a lot of the pundits that say, well, don't worry, the right wing is going to take over everything in the midterm elections. I'm not so sure about that. And you should not be so sure about that. The antidote to poison is people struggling to make sure that we don't accept these various injustices in our midst. So thank you very much for having us. So glad to be here.
So can you imagine what our staff meetings were like? Because Ben had to set the tone, or Dr. Cobb had to set the tone, and we went to church every time we came together so we would know why we were doing what we were doing, right? It was not abstract. It was not only in our heads, it was in our souls and in our hearts why we were doing what we were doing. And the person who set the tone and who set the sail and who set the course was Charles. And so, Charles, I'm going to ask you a question I've asked you many times. I know what you're going to say, but I want them to hear what you're going to say. What were you thinking, Charles? What were you thinking? And did you think we would be here 40 years later, still on this course?
Wow. Well, first of all, let me thank Jacoby and the dean for hosting this conference, and I really want to thank. And I don't know. I know they know this, but I don't know if they heard this, and I don't know if you heard this. I want to thank Ben and Dolly, really from the depths of my heart, for you know, the privilege of working with you for all these years. And I don't know if people know the story. People ask me, you know, how did you get involved in environmental justice? Well, how did you get involved in issues of race, poverty, and environment? Because at that time there wasn't a name for it. You know, how did you do that? And so I guess the short version is that you know, when I came to age, the civil rights movement really had a great influence, a profound influence on my life. And I got interested in these issues around race, poverty, and environment, and you know, sometime in the late 70s. But Warren County was the thing that really made me see the transformative potential of the issue. And that's because of the protests. And I don't know, you know, there was something about it that made me think about how this is something that could really make a difference. And so, you know, that's how we got started. And, you know, I asked Ben if I could come work for the UCC, for the Commission for Racial Justice. And a couple of years later, you know, this special project started, and they asked me to come and direct it. And so that's when, you know, we started to kind of put forward a vision for how to take what we know from Warren County and from all the other communities across the country like Warren County, and try to really put it on a map as a important issue for the nation to confront. And so, you know that shortly after Warren County, there was a Congressman Fauntleroy asked for a study that showed that 3 out of the 4 landfills in the South were in predominantly African American communities. And then you know, I thought, well, you know, we could take that and try to and replicate that on a national level, and that's what led to Toxic Waste and Race. And I always like to say, you know, we want to put the issue on the map, both literally and figuratively. And so And so that's what that led to that. And then, after that, so many people across the country started calling me because they gave them a tool to talk about something they knew already, which is that racism matter, and racism was an issue, was matter when it came to the fact that they had pollution in their communities. And so that's what led to us to start to think about, well, how do you coalesce a national movement around that? And that was the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit. And we started to then take that and started to focus on what kind of things needed to be put in place in government, particularly the federal government, in terms of the kind of the policies and the institutions necessary to begin to address this issue. And all this time, people were asking us so what is environmental justice, right? What's the issue? And I think it took us all a while to figure that out and to really kind of understand it in the kind of dimensions and the breadth of the issues, the types of issues, the communities that are affected, and the the important all these connections that we know now. And so if you want to fast forward to today, Bernice, I think I could sum it up by talking about what's happening in Congress today, what's happening in the federal government, in terms of all these policies that are really putting environmental justice and equity at the center of everything we do. And so a great example of that is a recent bill that we all are celebrating, the Inflation Reduction Bill, $60 billion for environmental justice. That's billion. We used to talk about,
Millions.
a million being a really big deal, 60 billion. Can you imagine? And so I think, somebody asked me, how are you going to address these issues once? And I thought long and hard about that. But you know what? We're looking at how we're going to address them. The things that are happening today are the kind of things that's going to be necessary to address environmental justice and meet the new challenges related to the inequities around race, poverty, environment, and in terms of climate and a host of a bunch of other things. And I just want to end by saying, Ben once introduced the Commission for Racial Justice staff as 26 people, 25 African Americans, and one Asian American soul brother. and somebody turned around and asked me, I wonder who that was.
Thank you, Charles.
So Bernice, Charles has been too modest. Look,
It really is.
when we started, the federal government was in total denial. The EPA
Wouldn't even know.
actually challenged us.
Yes.
When we issued toxic waste and race, the EPA tried to undermine its very existence.
Yeah.
But this is how God is at work. Years later, Charles becomes the first head of the Office of Environmental Justice in the EPA. So we started on the outside, moved in, and then we take it over
That's right.
for the interests of people. And so today, he is still probably the longest standing employee of the Environmental Protection Agency that's dealing and focusing with environmental justice. That's my soul brother, Charles Lee.
Asian soul brother.
So just a little tweak. Charles is the second director of the Office of Environmental Justice following Dr. Clarice Gaylord, but it is an incredible, the third. Who was before you? Barry?
Barry.
Oh, Barry. Yeah. Charles is the third director of the Office of Environmental Justice. Dolly, I want to ask you this question because we followed in New York. We followed a strategy that we saw you employing in Warren County, which was to run for office and you ran for and were elected the Commissioner of Deeds for Warren County, North Carolina. What was that about, Dolly, and how was that connected to your work to fight for environmental justice?
Let me just say too that environmental justice for us also included our political empowerment. As you heard me say, Warren County had always been African American or Black, but we were only able to elect one African American on the county commissions, none statewide, none nationally, because that Jim Crow era laws where the white folks said, don't you mess with that voting. Don't you mess with that voting, it'll get you in trouble. But what we did during the whole from 1978 to 1982, we organized and we registered people to vote. And for the first time in the history of Warren County, we elected a representative government. We elected a majority Black on the commissioners, a majority Black on the school board, all the way up to the state house, all the way up to the federal government.
Come on now, come on now.
And so, and talk about the church, talking about church, because faith without works is dead.
That's right.
So we engaged the church and we reminded them that faith without works was dead. And they came together and we, like I said, we elected. And in 1988, because the state bought 250 acres of land to put that landfill. Of course, after all the protests, they deeded all that land back to the county, except for the 25 acres because they were anticipating having a regional waste dump in our county. So, but they bought that land from a rich white man who fled to England after he sold the land to the state. And once I found that out, I said, we got to be concerned about who's selling land in Warren County and why they're selling land. So the Register of Deeds manage all your birth records. They manage you from birth to death. They manage your birth records, your death records, but most of all, they manage your land. And anybody selling property, you are the first to know who's selling it and who you selling it to. So I decided that I would run for Register of Deeds because I wanted to be in a position to know when the county was selling a large acre tract of land so that we can find out whether or not another toxic waste facility was coming to our county. I'm happy to say that even today, Warren County is the highest voting county in the state of North Carolina.
Come on now.
We do not vote any less in any race, less than 70%. And when other counties are voting 20, 30, 40%, Warren County, and in the last couple of elections, we voted 88%. So we learned that lesson, that environmental justice is political power. And I agree with Dr. Chavis. We got to be mindful. I'm so grateful that everybody is celebrating the 40th anniversary, but we want you to rededicate yourself to political power. Because Charles, while you may be the third person, before Warren County, there was no Environmental Justice Act.
That's
Bill
right.
Clinton signed that act after
right.
people laid their bodies in front of trucks
That's
in
right.
Warren County.
That's right.
And if we're gonna spend that how many billions of it? I'm still wrapping my head around how many billions, Sean? 60 billion. If we're gonna make sure that 60 billion is making a difference in our community, we got to elect the right people to Congress and to federal, state, and local office. So as in the spirit of John Lewis, let's get in some real good trouble. And in the spirit of my mom and daddy, let's make some good lemonade.
Yes. So Ben, I want to ask you a question on that political trajectory. So Dolly is absolutely right. There was no conversation within the federal government about the issues of environmental policy and enforcement around how people of color were discriminated against. And then somebody asked you and Dr. Bullard to serve on the transition team for President Clinton. It was the first time that people who represented the voice of environmental justice were ever asked to participate in a presidential transition. Why did you say yes, and what did you do in that process, you and Dr. Bullard? Did you raise hell?
Yes. We, Bob Bullard and I actually had offices inside the Environmental Protection Agency during the transition, Bill Clinton. And remember, Al Gore was the vice president, who was also an environmentalist. So they had clusters. So we were not only over the EPA in terms of transition. It was the EPA, the Interior Department, the Agriculture Department, and the Park Service, and a lot of other collateral departments. And what happened was, we made sure, you may remember in Clinton's first cabinet, there were more people of color in the cabinet than in any other presidential up until that point. So, but Bob, I didn't really want to work for the federal government. I just served on the transition team. He served on the transition team because we realized that we have to keep the movement alive. And this is very, very important. I'm glad you asked the question. We wouldn't be having these changes, even the changes that are going on today, if the movement was not alive. You got to keep the grassroots movement. We have to be able to regenerate ourselves. When Dolly talked about her children, what are the children doing now? We got to make sure that we pass this baton on. The movement has to regenerate itself with activists, with organizers, with mobilizers, also with researchers. I think that one of the things that we showed in the United Church of Christ Commissioners to Justice, research also has to be done by people who are engaged in the struggle. Because a lot of times research is done by people who are distanced from the struggle, who are not necessarily practitioners themselves. And one of the things that we found out is that, and Charles can speak on this, actually Malcolm X said it best. If you want to know the right answers to something, you first have to ask the right questions. Mm-hmm. And no one had ever asked, was there a correlation between race and environmental data? Even though we have a census every 2 years that go through a lot of questions. And of course, we know in the last census, they deliberately undercounted our communities. And that's why this election, the point that Dolly is making, is so very important. So yes, we participated in the Clinton-Gore transition team. And then later, President Clinton appointed a presidential commission on sustainable development. I served on that commission. And Robert Brown, who was the Secretary of Commerce, who unfortunately had this tragic accident and died, was the chair of that sustainable.
Ron Brown.
Ron Brown was of the Sustainable Development Commission. And in that, it was also the first time that they allowed grassroots activists for the environmental movement to even have a dialogue with some of the perpetrators, the polluters. And out of that came policies around sustainable development. So it's been a long, long struggle, and the struggle continues. But the thing that I am optimistic about is that we have much more potential, not only to get $60 billion or even more going forward, but I think people now understand the social determinants of health, and that's why when you talk about environmental justice, you should see it from an interdisciplinary perspective. Almost every academic discipline impairs or impacts what we use the term environmental justice and now climate justice. And I think that we need much more activism And that's, to me, the way you keep a movement alive. That's like I just found out that Sampson County, another county in North Carolina, is getting ready to dump more toxins in another landfill. Looks like we may have to go to jail again in North Carolina probably this year because you got to keep attention. So I agree with the commemorations. I've celebrated, but to me, the way you commemorate something is that you keep the movement alive and you keep pushing forward.
Thank you, Ben. I don't see Dr. Wilson, and I'm surprised, there he is. I'm surprised he's not standing right behind me because I know we are running out of time, but I want to ask Charles one more question, and then I want to ask you all to give some closing comments. And Charles, the question for you is, you have always focused on policy, always. You have kept the North Star about how we incorporate this work, these lessons, this activism into hardcore policy, statute, law. Where did that come from? What did you learn from the struggle in Warren County? I noticed that you have continued to work particularly on land use issues, on hazardous waste, on siting, on permitting, on public participation. Where did that come from, Charles? And what are y'all doing at EPA? Because it seems like there's a whole lot of activity going on at EPA. People have rediscovered environmental justice and environmental racism. And you, Charles, are in the middle of all of that. Why the focus on policy, and what is the future?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of ways to answer that question. I mean, I think, one of the things that I really believe in is that policy has to be informed by the grassroots, that it really has to connect with people that have these issues, that are in the struggle. And, and I think that's where you find the best solutions. I mean, Dolly gave that example of Warren County, the decision or the fight, the position that they took to detoxify the landfill. I remember a conversation in 1982 in Warren County with some of the protesters, and they were telling me that they thought that they should why not? They should send the contaminated soil to a place called Emile, Alabama. And that was where the site of actually the largest hazardous waste facility in the U.S. was, the chemical waste management facility. And we talked about the fact that that was located in the Alabama Black Belt. And a community just like theirs. And I was really remarkably surprised and gratified that as this played out, you hear what Dolly said in terms of the position that communities take. So I think that the North Star for how policy is made is got to be that connection with the community. So one of the things that is in the EPA's equity plan, that's there's an executive order on advancing racial equity. There's a number of priority items, and three of them speak to this. Well, actually, all of them speak to this, but three that I want to point out. One is the fact that we got to have invest in the capacity of communities so that they can actually make a difference in the decision-making process. And the second one has to do is that EPA has to make sure they're taking that into account and show evidence of the fact that that's actually affecting decisions. Because lots of times, a lot of things are said and things move forward and, nothing happens. It never connects, And one of the third ones was really investing, like Ben talked about, the importance of continual research, but community-driven research, community research, the research that communities participate in. So, and the development of community science. And so those are three things I thought were important to point out in that, in terms of that. So I think, everything that, if you look at the whole array of things from enforcement permitting, to the rules, to how cleanup standards are set. We need to start to make sure that we're accounting for not just the way that environmental protection has been done, which is like looking at one pollutant at a time, but looking at the whole lived reality, the live of the communities, looking at, what all of us are now grappling with, the concept of cumulative impacts, and how we need to account for the total burden of that's in these overburdened communities, that these are, they're called hotspots, they're called clusters, they're called sacrifice zones, that we have to account for all of that. And, and that includes not just, the inequitable distribution of the harms and risks, but also the lack of benefits, that they all have to come together. So I think this is a big issue to try to get our hands around. But I don't think, like I said in the beginning of my remark, this is going to really happen without really connecting with the communities, and that these processes are really driven by the community.
Thank you, Charles. So final comments. Dolly, for you, what should we do for the next 40 years to advance this work?
Well, let me just say again, my final remarks is thank everyone for this plenary. I remain hopeful. I remain, in the words of my pastor, I would say, keep the faith. Believe in yourself. Believe that you can do it. Believe that the battle, when it seems like you're losing the battle, you got to keep your eyes on the war. And we still have to fight against environmental racism. We still have to fight against climate racism. Every time you see the word justice, you got to understand that you got to fight the racism in order to achieve the justice. And it's not an easy fight, but we can do it. I'm inspired. 40 years later, I'm inspired, even though we are still talking about achieving justice. I'm inspired because we're still talking about it. Thank you.
We thank God for your life, Dolly Burwell. Ben, 40 years hence, we may not be here, me, you, Charles, and Dolly, but what do we hope will be happening?
Well, at 40 years from now, I hope the country is reading about how we put Donald Trump in jail.
Ben would say it.
Secondly, I think that 40 years from now, the demographics of the world will continue to change. And we're going to find out that we have one humanity, one God, one galaxy or galaxies. Because one of the concerns I have with the intergalactic movement is that sometimes if we don't solve these problems down here on Earth, we're going to take some of these same colonial imperialism, conquering, dominating other things and other beings, rather than the scripture that we quoted when we had the 30th anniversary of the Warren County situation. I just want to repeat that, and that's from Psalms. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And so we have to not claim how we can subdue the earth because it doesn't belong to us. That's crazy. And I think that we have to see each other as brothers and sisters. So I'm optimistic. To answer your question, 40 years from now, I think we'll be celebrating a stronger environmental justice movement. We'll be celebrating a stronger relationship building between all the peoples of the world, of the earth, but also other beings that we'll probably discover in the next 40 years that also share some of these galaxies with us. So I'm optimistic.
Thank you, Ben. Charles, you lay in a path, but what do you hope is going to be the legacy of this work, and where are we going over the next 40 years?
Well, first of all, I think I think two fronts. One is that, like I said before, we're going to really begin to see how to address and solve some of these issues of environmental injustice. That with all the the kind of investments that's going to be needed, the kind of research that's proliferating, the kind of in the science and the new types of science, and the kind of approaches to really kind of incorporate this into the regulatory process. So that's one part of that. And then the second way I would answer that is, I think we're beginning to see a whole new generation of people that are going to focus on environmental justice from all walks of in all areas, and I think that this is a great opportunity for all of you to grow in this. Like when I said before that we're going to really try to figure out how to address this, that means that it's actually saying we're going to learn together about how to address this, because these are really hard issues, new issues, and it's going to take new thinking, new ways of a lot of creativity and innovation, and a lot of new connections between people. Like there're going to be new collaborations and new ways in which we work together in order to solve these problems. So I think that I think there's the upsurge in terms of interest in environmental justice throughout the country, in all areas, is a great place for us to really think about how to nurture that new generation. And and I guess when I say that, I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about you.
Thank you, Charles.
Bernice, let me just say too, let me just add one thing. My challenge is always, even though we are learning new and creative ways to think about things, just remember what Dr. Chambers said. Don't forget the grassroots activism, because we need to have the grassroots activism. And so when we are working in our communities, understand that with all we need the research, we need the new ideas, but a lot of those old ways of going to jail,
Hear, hear.
don't forget to use them.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear. So please join me in thanking the true icons. None of us would be here. No books would be written. No degrees would be had. No organizing would be done. No nonprofits would have been created. No global conversation would be had. No climate justice would be talked about. None of this would be going on without their sacrifice for all of us. So if we take nothing from this sacrifice for other people, it's not about us. It's about the people and the communities on this earth that we're fighting for. We can never thank you enough for what you gave us. Everybody stand up and give them a serious round of applause.
Let's keep the applause going. Thank you, Bernice. I called the audible and said, Bernice, you'd be much better moderating this session than me. So thank you, Bernice, because she was there, right? And thank you for that statement about the next 40 years, what we need to be doing. So we're a little bit behind. Thanks to my icons, the folks, like you said, Bernice, I met Dr. Chavis in 1995 in Elizabeth City State at a conference that was organized by ECO when I was part of an EPA internship. Also met Mustafa Ali and Dr. Robert Bullard. And so I wouldn't be here today without meeting them. So, I'm gonna do EJ. I took a picture with Dr. Bullard and Dr. Chavis, and I had a long goatee at the time. I was smiling. I don't have a goatee now, but I remember that. And we took a photo 2 years later. 2 years ago, like a 25-year later photo at the HBCU conference, Climate Change Conference. So thank you, Dr. Chavis, for that mentoring and just being an icon. Thank you, Dolly, being one of those mothers of the environmental movement. Of course, Charles. This is the Mount Rushmore. Actually, this is a nice Mount Rushmore right here of environmental justice. Let's give them a round of applause again. So as I was saying, we're a little bit behind, but let me do a couple things real quick. So I want to thank our sponsors, because without them, we couldn't do some of this nice food. I'm going to talk about the food later on. Give me a couple seconds to talk about the food. But for the overall work of supporting Siege and what we're doing around environmental justice, thank our sponsors. When it comes to a lot of this work, when it comes to the actual plan of the event, we had another sponsor that we want to thank here on the premier level, but they're anonymous, so I'll just keep going. We have our presenting sponsors, Real EDF. The big greens are starting to transform and do more work. Dr. Margot Brown and EDF, go give her a shout out. Mustafa Ali, National Marble Federation, right? So we got the groups that are doing more. Thank you, EPA. Namate, we're talking about global EJ work. In this region, we now have a Mid-Atlantic Justice Coalition. And it's the second generation of the DMV EJ Coalition that came out of the first summit back in 2012. And Namate is a co-founder of that regional coalition. When we're talking about global EJ, Namate has been doing global EJ work around the world. So doing work in Myanmar, doing work in Nepal, doing work in Pakistan, Bangladesh, doing work in Africa, doing work in South America. So as Dr. Chavis mentioned, this movement is global. So I want to give them a shout out, and they'll have some sessions today, and you're going to hear about from Namate folks and some of this work within the region. Also, Union Concerned Scientists, NRGC, gold tier folks that help with day 1, day 2 sessions, silver tier people, folks, and School of Public Health. So thank you, sponsors. So we're going to shift to our first concurrent block of sessions. We're a little bit behind. For those sessions, we're going to stick to the hour and 15-minute block. And so I think we're going to go, which means we should go from around 10:55. How long it takes to transition out of this room to there? 10:55 to about, I can't count, y'all. So 10:55 to about 12:10, something like that. So we'll come back after 12:10 to come to lunch. So y'all go ahead and transition to those sessions. But what I want to say for tonight, we're going to have a great day today. This is an important event. We want to close strong. A lot of great sessions. Please attend. We're going to have a nice closing panel, and then we're going to have a after-event celebration, the food. So I ordered a lot of hors d'oeuvres, y'all. So y'all don't leave. I need somebody to eat that food. Okay, nice. A lot for those who like crab cake, lots of crab cake. So please stay for the closing event, the after party, because there's lots of food. You got to take that food. You got to eat that food. So stay all day with us. Be here. Energy versus power. Energy, needing energy to build power. And recognize, in this last point, Dr. Chavis said, our shared humanity. Environmental justice is about love, our shared humanity and hope, right? So the next 40 years would be full of hope as we move forward in this movement. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the day.